I want to uncover what's under all the cliches about aging. I don't want to just accept them because that's what culture throws out. And it isn't necessarily that they're wrong, but there's a lot more underneath that needs to be excavated. So that's my work. And this whole mind center for doing this is that I think it's the work for many people. And how do we help each other? So that's why I want people to share, even though many people don't like to break into small groups. I get that. And there's an etiquette to follow. Listen to everyone, let people have a chance to speak, don't monopolize. I get that. But I'm learning from you at least as much as you're learning from me, and you're probably learning from each other a heck of a lot more. So, for instance, 2 weeks ago, we worked on the topic of do I still matter? And I said that what I have by my computer, and I always do, was the words, your life is not important, your work does not matter. And there were a lot of people who said, yes, it does. Our work is important, and it does matter, and our lives are important. So it was great. We had a wonderful dialogue around that. And what I realized looking at it is, yeah, what's really changing is our motivations for work. The basic motivations guiding our life are what's changing. So I thought, I see, if you were to do this class again, like aging, advanced aging, another series called Advanced Aging, that's what you would be specifically examining. But it took that kind of a loop of feedback and listening and integration for me to see what is the basic question here. So I phrase some questions and then I count on you to rephrase them and kind of get to a different point. So that's what I learned from the survey results. And that's what I learned from listening to everybody here. So that's a very important piece of this. I ain't teaching anything. I'm done with teaching. That's it. Okay. I'm so happy to see people. I know there are a few people who are at the Auschwitz retreat. I'm so happy to see Barbara. Hi, Barbara. In Switzerland and others. So thank you for being here, regardless of your time zone. Okay. I think that covers all the comments we had from 2 weeks ago, Jeff, if you remember, and Chloe. Today's topic is Am I Still Loved? And what I wrote, and this was written a while ago, was I was so coddled when I was born. Now I'm not coddled and I'm not even cuddled. Whether I live with a partner, whether I live in a community or alone. Tell me what happens to love at this age? What happens to love at this age? That's a big one. So for myself, I used to live in community. I don't anymore. I've had 2 marriages. I don't anymore. And I live alone pretty much. I'm on my own here with a housemate who rents a place for me here and who is disabled and lies downstairs because she can't make it upstairs anymore. And that's changed things for me. But pretty much I'm on my own. So this is just my own autobiographical thing of where I am now with the question of love. I like to start with a song. Jeff, would you and you'll all recognize it. And I always love to see someone with the name of Angio in the middle of his Dharma name. And I see someone whom I don't know called John Angio Porter. And Angio is a name we all adopted. I have Angio in my name too, which meant peacemaker. So I'm always very happy to see that name appear. Okay, Jeff, would you please put it on? Here's the lyrics if you can. Right. No, this is a song by Joni Mitchell, and it was sung by Judy Collins. And the words that meant a lot to me were, I've looked at love from both sides now, and give and take, and still somehow it's love delusions. Love delusions, I recall. I don't know love at all. Not knowing love is a pretty good way to start. What is that? Oh, let's look at again what our culture says about this. Well, regardless of anything, our culture usually says that at our age, love is no longer for us, it's for younger people. Romance, sex, falling in love, falling out of love. It's just not for us anymore. Sometimes people look at an older couple and they say, oh, how cute. Aren't they cute? Sometimes I get the sense that the only big love we're supposed to have is as grandparents. And if, like me, you don't have children, your own children, uh, you may not have grandchildren. So, what love do we have at this age? Maybe, oh, you love to garden, or we love the library. That's the kind of thing. So each of these actually has a very deep layer of meaning, but I'm just what I call the vanilla version of what our culture tells us we are. The vanilla version is that you've had your time, you've had your time lying awake and wondering about whether he will call or she will call, or do they love you, they don't love you. You've had your time, but love is no longer for you right now. That's what I feel our culture is giving us. So let me quote these words, and I think it's a poem by John O'Donohue, who's the Celtic philosopher, poet, Christian, but I'm not 100% sure. So if anybody knows better, please feel free. But these are the verse that I read of his. On the mountain tonight, the full moon faces the full sun. Now could be the moment when we fall apart or we become whole. On the mountain tonight, the full moon faces the full sun. Now could be the moment when we fall apart or we become whole. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the chat while you think about that. Bye. Okay, I did it. Those words meant a lot to me from the very first time I saw them. Because what is he saying? Again, look at the song. It says, well, there's this side, there's that side. There's give and there's take. And now I don't know what it is. And he says, yeah, there's a time when the full moon is going to meet the full sun. And now is when we're going to just break apart or we become whole. And it meant a lot to me for many reasons. So, for instance, I thought of all the times when there was so much acrimony in the middle of love, or they go hand in hand. How do you have a family without those things going on all the time? There's a friend of mine with 3 children, and I have been there at their home, and it has really been horrendous. There's they're not well. I'm not gonna. I don't know if it's neurodivergence. I'm simply not professional enough to know. I know that there's been violence in the family from children to parents, not parents to children. A physical violence. I mean, I know there has been yelling and screaming, and so when I've been there, it's been very difficult for me, and certainly for them. And when either I've said something or anything, the David, the husband, has always said, there are children. There are children. And that for me is when the full moon meets the full sun. And that's for me a time when families break down, break apart, when couples divorce because they can't deal with that. That's when these people barely have any company at home because they don't want people to experience what I've experienced. So it's those things. And so where is love now? Where is it? Where is it in these situations? I've always felt about my own practice that my practice, when I'm happy and everybody's happy, that's not an area of practice. What's the big deal? What's the big deal about such a situation? I love them, they love me, we love each other, all that stuff. There's no practice there. The practice starts when I am not in my comfort zone. And that's what that refers to when the full moon meets the full sun. What happens then? And I think the same is true about love. Love is great when it's wonderful and he loves me and I love him and blah, blah, blah. We all know that. And when that doesn't happen, and when all the other nuances come in, what happens then? That's when those two orbs meet. And does it all break apart? Or does it become something else? Does it become something else? And there's somebody once defined alchemy like, yeah. No, I think that's me. I wrote it that that alchemy is purifying. We find some way to purify to get the whole thing. And the expanding work of love is to go wider and wider and wider. Yeah. That's the expanding work of love. And I always think of my friend, some of you may know her, Barbara certainly knows her, Levana Marshall in London, who was a dear friend of mine. And she passed away some years ago, but she wrote me once, and she had magnificent emails. And she wrote me about her grandchildren. She was very, very nervous about them because their parents, not because their parents had trouble. They had an alcoholic mother, they had, all kinds of things. And she wrote me this in her email: Eve, you just have to love and love and love, even when your heart breaks because you can't do enough, because what you do won't be enough, because you see that they'll still get hurt and wounded and damaged, and what you do won't be enough. She said this about her grandchildren. You just have to do it, even when your heart breaks because you can't do it, and you see that it won't be enough and all that. And that always spoke to me very, very much. And she was already older. She was close. Yeah, she was in her late 70s. I think she passed away before she turned 80. Yeah, when she wrote me that just is. So that for me is that work of alchemy, and that's what she was encountering, that the full moon meets the full sun, and it isn't which one is gonna win. There's no winning here. So what do you do? When we're younger, it's like we know what we want. It's very conditional. And if I don't get this, if this isn't the result I want, I don't want to do it. But now it's a different stage. It's a stage of alchemy. And this is what O'Donoghue's talking about, that this is the moment when we fall apart, or love falls apart, or we become whole. So what I'd like to do is take a few minutes of just quiet, and I'd like you, we'll see what comes up for you freely. But what I hope may come up for you is some situation where you encountered the full moon and the full sun, coming together tonight, facing each other. What happens then? What has happened in the situations you encountered when that happened? Please take a few moments, and you don't have to wait for 5 minutes. You could already raise your electronic hand when you are ready to share. And then at some point, but only after several minutes, Jeff, we'll start calling on people. But give people some minutes, 5 minutes, to really look at that and read it again. On the mountain tonight, the full moon faces the full sun. Now could be the moment when we fall apart or we become whole.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Yeah, I'm Holly. I'm from Washington, D.C. Thanks, Eve, for getting us started and for bringing this to us. I am forever comforted by ideas such as like Eric Fromm presents, where love is not a thing or an action between two people or a feeling between a person and something that they're passionate about, but that love is something much bigger and wider than that, and that it starts like that. It's not that my love has the potential to get wider and wider. It's that love begins at its widest, and I can participate in it as a little fleck of love. And for me, that just brings great comfort, particularly as I age with certain conditions, that physical conditions, psychological conditions that I think create a big problem for people, right? And can they still love me when I'm this big problem, And, I reckon with that quite a bit, whether it's in a work situation or in my living situation or family and other relationships. Um, Again, for me, what brings a sense of wholeness, of that wholeness, which sometimes comes after a falling apart, is that love will exist no matter what. That it is not this, it's not this action. I love this from Eric Fromm: love without goals, love in which the only thing of importance is the act of loving itself. In this kind of love, it is being and not consuming that plays the key role. It is human self-expression. Love is the full play of our human capacities. And I say that about myself frequently, that I'm a lover of humans, humanness, and humanity. And that's, when I set my expectations in that way, I never feel lacking of love. So I just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Would you feel comfortable sharing with us why it is some of the not limitations, some of the characteristics you mentioned that affect or that cause you to worry that you may not be loved?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. I'm happy sharing that. I share it all the time. I live with PTSD, complex developmental trauma, and, so when it comes to relationships, it's it's an exercise. It's a constant exercise of aiming to discover a balance between wanting to be loved, right? And not feeling like the only way they can love me is if they fully understand me and also, put up with me and tolerate me. And those are the people that I know are going to love me as if they can really understand. And when I get caught up in that, there's just so many conditions, right? There are just so many conditions. And, the fact is, I am who I am and I react the way I react. And sometimes I don't react the way that I typically would react, which makes me and everybody happy and, that kind of stuff. And, whether it's like in my building, being very sensitive to noise after a certain time in my building. Like I like my peace. I like my peace after 10 o'clock. And the law in DC says that after 10 o'clock, you need to be quiet. And I expect that. Right. And so there's this expectation. And when I voice that expectation, sometimes I'm the bad guy. I'm the bad guy. Right. And so what brings me back to that wholeness after the falling apart of my brain thinking, I'm the bad guy. Oh no, I'm the bad guy. Right. What brings me back to the wholeness is to remember that I am who I am, and I'm this little fleck of love in this energetic thing of love. And this is just a human relational thing that needs to be, navigated. And it is very much like the full moon meeting the full sun. Everyone wants what they want. Are we going to fall apart or are we going to become more whole from it? Really lies in the transparency and the honesty and the commitment to believing that this isn't a threat, right? I'm not threatening their fun and they're not threatening my peace. It really comes down to how, as humans, are we going to believe that love is something for humanity and not, something that we need to cling to or old or own or something about, what's the word that Fromm uses? Consume, you know? So that's just one area. That's one area. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, thank you. Uh, I see Steve Gelb has his hand up. Please, Steve.
Yeah, thanks. What came to mind for me was a situation when I was a teenager with my father, with whom I had a really difficult relationship. And he had moved out from home. He was in the process of divorcing my mother. And I was having a really difficult argument with him about who knows what. And it just got worse and worse. And there seemed to be no end to it. And I went to the bathroom. And when I came back, I kind of had an out of body experience where I suddenly saw his pain. And I say out of body because it felt like I wasn't conscious. I walked over to him and embraced him, and we both started crying. And it was like a moment of grace because I hadn't consciously done that, but it happened. And to me, it was an example of being at the precipice of falling apart and then becoming whole. And I'm always grateful that that moment occurred, where it came from.
Thank you very, very much for that, Steve. Thank you. Yeah, David Gibson, please.
Thanks for this course. I'm really enjoying it. So what came up for me was the role that I've been in as a caregiver frequently for my elderly parents that are 89 and 91 and their relationship and what sometimes looks like the full moon and the full sun butting heads. And I'm trying to figure out how to tell this story briefly, but the with the help of a bereavement counselor, I've really come to understand through this process the loss that especially my mom has gone through. I mean, she's lost her ability to be in her home over the past few years. She's lost her ability to drive. She can't really cook anymore. She can barely walk with a rollator. So she's had a lot of loss. And often when I'm there, my primary role is taking her from her apartment in assisted living up to see my dad in skilled nursing. And my dad is in hospice care now. And kind of where this comes to a head for me is when we're up visiting with my dad, it feels like to me my mom spends the entire time fussing and worrying, and I'll call mothering him. You know, you need more cover, you need more clothes on, you're too cold, to the point that it feels like harassing him. And my brothers and I tried to sort of take her aside and say, Mom, don't you want to just be present with dad when you're there and just love him and be with him? Do you really want to spend your time annoying and harassing him about the fact that he needs more cover? But then I kind of stepped back and figured out that's her love language with him. And that's her way of caring for him. And that's kind of all she has left, is that when we go and visit, she's lost control of so many things that what looks to me like badgering is her way of loving him. And so my brothers and I kind of stepped back and said, okay, how do we change this conversation? This is either going to blow up or it's going to become whole, as the poem says. And so what we started doing was, when she started into this, we would start instigating the conversation and say, well, hey, Dad, what about your time in the Army during the Cold War? Or what do you remember about, you know, this family reunion that we had? And we would start them both into storytelling. And just these amazing, wonderful, sweet stories came out where they were both able to engage with each other. And so instead of sort of scolding my mom and taking away that love language, we just shifted the conversation and made something whole that felt like it was getting more and more tense. And so it's a simple thing, but the thing that I'm learning and caregiving with and for my parents is to start not view them through the lens as my parents, but as other human beings that have loss and joys and pain and suffering. And they're just other human beings that happen to be my parents, and thinking of them that way and trying to get out of this reflex, you know, I'm their son, I have to behave this way. So anyway, I'll wrap it up there. But yeah, I saw the moon and the sun after 64 years of marriage kind of hitting each other full on. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And as somebody already wrote on the chat, love has many, many languages. Really, really. And maybe part of our job is to start speaking new languages and start learning new languages that are all languages of love. Thank you for that, David. Really. Yeah, Pat Dolan, please. It's nice to see you.
Kind of want to push back a little bit on the bit about, you know, the society expects us to be done with love. Society expects us to be done with certain kinds of love. But, you know, I'm 71 And I'm supposed to be bare bonded. I'm supposed to have done that in the flesh of youth and the outburst of erotic energy. And then I'm supposed to have been, in that relationship monogamously for the last 40 years. And we're supposed to have deepened and become warmer and so on and so forth. And, and so if I don't have that and I have a failed marriage, um, and, that's not true of, I don't know whether that's true of even a majority of people, all right. But it is something that if you don't have it and you look around, you're wrong, even if you're not straight. And, I'm also supposed to have a child who is, I live in Iowa City. And so all our children are supposed to go to law school and med school and get PhDs and stuff. But, who's well along in their career. And I'm supposed to be helping them. And, my son is great. I love him and he's fine. But, he's not married and I don't think we'll ever have grandchildren. And don't have that love either. And I think all of us can, see how that works for us individually. Straight older guy. And, all of us there's all blips in it. I mean, we get, even if we're partners and we've been together for 38 years, we still get pissed off at each other. And, that's wrong. We're supposed to settle down. And, it's that sort of limitation on the kinds of love that we can have, particularly, and we're going to talk about sex in a couple of months. So, we can sort of bracket that off. But it's, it really starts with pair bonding. And if you're somebody who doesn't believe necessarily in that or doesn't function necessarily that way, then you're left out. And if you're somebody for whom, and I think this is a lot of people, relationships run their course and end, then you're left out of that. And there's something wrong. And, so it's not the lack of the kinds of love I'm told that are available to me. It's the limitations on them that I think socially it would be nice if we could change. And my parents are, and this is a mercy for them, and are not here. And, there's also that kind of idea that our lives are an accumulation of losses, among other things, right? Ecstatic moments, access of wisdom, yes, but also losses. And, again, I don't think that our society gives quite the credit it should to the cumulative effect of these things. It's one thing to lose your mother when you're a child and people get all sorts of sympathy for that. But when you do it when you're 70 and you've had all the other losses that have come up to that point, it's different and yet the same. And people I know, I mean, except for grief counselors, don't talk about it. I'm trailing off, so I'll be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Here's Mark. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Eve, this is very wrong for me. Almost from the moment you started talking, I started crying. And you said something about wanting to be cuddled. That's my overriding desire in life right now, is just in my personal relationships with all my friends, I hug. I love to hug and be hugged. David was talking about being a caretaker. I was a caretaker of my parents before they passed away. And when they passed away, I inherited my brother, who's very severely disabled and has been since he was a child, and is also on the autism spectrum. Plus, I have a son on the autism spectrum. it's a lot of effort, and you put forth a lot of love all the time, which I don't begrudge. I feel good about the love I put out. But that phrase is just precisely the area. I think the Tibetans have a word for it, and I don't remember what it is, but between the living and the dead, there's a space, and sometimes like I'm in that space, and if I could just get a little cuddling, I could. And next one maybe. So that's it. That's where I am.
Yeah, that's that maybe that's a good title for for advanced aging when we do this class again. If I could just get a cuddle. It's a good one. Okay, Helen, and we're gonna go on, but everybody, including Rachel, will have a chance to talk more, but I'm gonna move on. So Helen, if you can please share and then we'll go on.
Yeah, it just struck me as something to share that at the age of 70, I made the completely unpredictable decision, though I thought about it a lot, to go single and to let go of my marriage at a time when I would most be wanting cuddles and caregiving. And I did a ceremony of letting go of that marriage, which had been difficult for a few years, quite difficult. And I did a wedding to my life, which is now morphed into life, not my life. That's too limited. And I just want to say it's limitless what it means to marry life. I'm sorry, it sounds a little abstract, but it's extremely sensual and endlessly nurturing when I wake up and say, "Hi there, life. Good morning. I love you." And I get much more than that back.
Hmm. Wow. Just when I was thinking of forgetting the second half of this and going into the kind cuddles and things like that, you actually segued me back to what I wanted to present now, although it will connect with what we've been talking about. So a member of the Zen Peacemaker Order once sent me a book. It was Jane Hirschfield and Mariko Aratane's translations of Chinese love poems. It's called The Ink Dark Moon. And basically it's two Chinese courtesans who lived a very, very long time ago. And they wrote poems about being courtesans and waiting for their lovers at night. So I thought, okay. So one night, it was in the summer, I was reading it, and it was night, and it was summer because the windows were open, and I live in the country, and I'm lying in bed, which is where I usually do my reading last thing at night. And I'm just reading these very short verses, one after the other. And I read this, and something happened to me. Night deepens with the sound of a calling deer, and I hear my own one-sided love. So here's a courtesan waiting for a lover, and this was very ritualized, the lovemaking in that culture or in that part of society. So here it is again. Night deepens with the sound of a calling deer, and I hear my own one-sided love. So for her it was, where's the other guy? That's why it's one-sided. But when I read that, it suddenly hit me how life loved me unconditionally. Unconditionally. And how conditionally I loved life back. I had all these conditions for appreciating my life. If it's a pretty day, if, if the doctor says I'm okay, if I'm in good health, if I'm in good spirits, if this doesn't happen, if Donald Trump loses, if on and on and on and on and on, if those conditions are met, I love life. And life loves me unconditionally. I just kind of got that reading those lines. Like, yes, of course I've had down things. Who doesn't? But life loves me unconditionally. I felt it so deeply. And at the same time, I felt how conditional and limited my love of life was. It was a very powerful thing that hit me. So I don't love life as life loves me. And you know something? I don't love myself as life loves me. I saw that too. And why not? So now we can look at why does that happen? And when I was remembering this, I remembered that some 5 years ago, I was at a memorial service, and it was a small dinner that a few of us had together. And I was about 70 at the time, 71 maybe. And there was a couple there that had just gotten together. They were in their mid-70s. And they were really in love. And then the woman turned to me and said, it takes courage to love at this age, in this time, in our lives. It takes courage to love at this age in our lives. I am quoting her because I made a note of those words. It takes courage. And I think Pat Dolan also was referring to that. What has happened to us in the meantime? Why does it take courage to love so much and to actually feel that I can love more? Even with the losses, with everything, there's an invitation to love even more. And why don't I? And then there's another poet. There's a lot of poems about this. Mark Doty wrote all these sentimental images of children and animals, what you see on Facebook and all that, and sappy representations of love, where you say, oh, look how cute that is. And he says, they are fueled by their opposites, by a terrible human rage that nothing stays. Underneath all those, oh, look at the dog, look at the little this, look at the that. There's something there, but why doesn't love stay? Why don't relationships stay? And that, of course, always reminds me of those great words by Annie Lamott, who wrote, how alive am I willing to be? And I think that's what, Helen, you spoke to. How alive am I willing to be? So this is what I'd like us to really look at. What I'm going to do, please start reflecting on this, and I'm going to put those in the chat. And I'm going to ask Jeff in about 5 minutes to divide us into groups of 5. In each group for 20 minutes so that we could really share with each other what comes up here. Yeah, let me do that.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll just wait another minute or so as the rest of the group rejoin.
Hi, sweetie pumpkin. That's me saying that, right? I'm not muted. I'm talking to my dog.
thought you were talking to all of us.
Oh, well, it could be. It could just
Sweet pumpkin.
Yes.
You're supposed to Mark Atkinson. Yeah. We can't all. It would be fun if we could all cuddle together, but
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
yeah. I know there was somebody. Oops, I haven't looked at the chat. I know there's somebody who. So, Jeff, do you see the chat from Paul Bartlett?
I did see that. Yeah, I don't know what to do about that.
I think everybody's back now.
Okay. What did I want to say? Yeah. And now I forgot, which takes us to the next session in 2 weeks. Memory loss. I'm a living manifestation for the next session. But there was a person who we left here who had wanted to share, and I forget your name. I'm sorry. So if you'd like to come back and share, please do so. But I also want to ask David, who was in my group, to share briefly, because we don't have that much time. David, what you shared with our small group.
And Eve, that was Rachel Wooten.
Yeah, that was me. I wanted to say, which many of you probably know, this very famous thing that John Lewis said to Krista Tippett when she was asking him, how could you...
John Lewis, please don't assume we're all we're all US.
Oh, I'm sorry. John Lewis, well, I'm getting ready to say who he was. So he was a very famous civil rights advocate and lived into his 80s. He was a congressman, whatever. And he really spoke a lot about love. And Krista Tippett, who has a podcast called On Being, was with him going through these various scenarios in these famous, terrible events of the days before the Civil Rights Act. Anyway, she asked him, when you were walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, this famous event, and all these policemen were coming at you with billy clubs and dogs and horses, how could you love them? And he said, oh, I don't have to love them. I just have to invite them into the love that's already there. And I think that's really profound. And I also think it's very difficult when the full moon meets the full sun to remember that. So that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I'd asked David to speak to, yeah. David, can you unmute? And
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everyone. I love what was just said, inviting, because my invitation is I'm 76, and for the first time in my life, I blacked out in the shower. I was preparing for a colonoscopy. I went through the day before the whole liquid prep thing. Got up in the morning to prepare to go for the colonoscopy, went into the shower, was so exhausted. I lowered myself to the floor, stood up after a couple minutes, absolutely blacked out. When I came to, there was blood all over. I fractured my nose. I had 4 stitches in a finger. And it's been this amazing experience. And it brings for me the poem, I guess, by Galway Kinnell, and also the idea of life loving me unconditionally. How do I, it's like the full moon and the full sun are for me, this whole experience in my own heart. And how do I meet myself at 76 with this incredible sense of vulnerability and mortality, pain, and I'm watching myself as I reach into the refrigerator and I'm not fully paying attention and I bang my finger that has the stitches and it hurts and I get a little angry with myself, or it's just, oh, why aren't you paying more attention? And I'm going through all of these things of the opportunity to be more gentle and be more accepting of this is what happened. And I mentioned how important it was for me when, so my partner picked me up because we don't live together, drove me to the colonoscopy office, and I'm a mess. And the doctor comes out and he very gently puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "This is not your fault." And how important that was for me to hear, because on my own, even though he said it, I still struggle with it. Somehow it's my fault that and so this has all been, this is my mountain right now with the full moon and the full sun. It's just, I'm immersed in this beautiful opportunity to, how can I be more loving towards myself in this whole journey with this? And I sense this will open me up more to the possibility of being more loving in relationships and with other people. But this is a ripe opportunity to sort of start with my own heart and my relationship with this flesh at this point in my life. So that's,
Well, yeah, I was very moved when David shared that in the small group, because he's right. We're at a time when the person we knew is no longer there. That person's changing. And when I look at myself, I say, okay, you're not thinking as clearly, you're not as sharp, you can't even see as well as you did, all those things. Can you still love yourself? How much do I still love myself? Or life keeps on loving me unconditionally. How conditional am I in loving myself? At this time, that's a huge challenge for me, especially if, like me, you've taken pride in your good mind, your good this, what you were able to do, all that blah stuff, nonsense. Now what do I take pride in? Who do I love? Who do I love now? Yeah, well, thank you, David, for bringing that up. It meant a lot to me, certainly, really. And thank you very much to all of you, and especially the person who talked about having a wedding with herself. I don't think you're on my first screen here, but I've never heard that. That was really wonderful. I'm curious if there's a ceremony for that, and if you have it, I certainly would love to share it.
Thank you, Eve. I'll see if I can dig it up.
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Helen, for that. It's a very special thing. I always want to encourage us to please, this is a free presentation of Zen Peacemakers, but it costs them. Well, I appreciate so much Jeff's work and Chloe's work. Please make a donation to Zen Peacemakers if you're getting anything out of this series. That's one. And the second, in 2 weeks, don't forget, it's going to be tough to remember, memory loss. And the blurb under that actually combines two things. Does your warehouse of information runneth over? Who can take in all the new facts, technologies, amidst all the events of our life? How much do we want to remember? Who cares what I had for breakfast anyway? So I noticed that it combines real memory loss from old age and also lessening a lessening of our cognitive abilities, especially now with the new technologies. So I'll have to figure out, that's a lot to cover, but we'll figure it out. Everybody here is so capable. Okay, try to remember to come from memory loss. And this book by James Hillman, The Force of Character in the Lasting Life, has a very good chapter on memory loss. So if you have the book, I suggest that you read that chapter. Okay.